Brian and Dimitri here. Quick public service announcement that Mythicist Milwaukee's most fun event is our annual Myth Information Conference held on Saturday, September 30th. The conference is powerful and draws national attendance, so this is definitely the event to attend.
This is really a great opportunity to meet like-minded people that want reasoned discussion and debate, and not a political knife fight, something I think is lacking in today's society.
This is our most ambitious effort, with speakers including intellectual rock stars Faisal Mutar, Asra Nomani, debating Islam in the Age of Trump, moderated by another rock star, Matt Dillahunty.
In addition, we'll have secular activist Melissa Chen and YouTube juggernauts Armored Skeptic and Shoe on Head leading a discussion panel, with another YouTube sensation, Sargon of Akkad, debating popular podcast host Thomas Smith from Serious Inquiries Only.
Not to mention all of the special guests who will be hanging out with everyone, including Seth Andrews, Richard Carrier, Paul Provenza, Allie Jackson, David Fitzgerald, Aaron Ra, and Bryce Blankenagel.
The day-long event culminates with the red carpet premiere of Batman and Jesus, a provocative documentary and comedy juxtaposing the lore of Batman with the saga of Jesus. Get your tickets now at mythicistmilwaukee.com for in-person or for the live stream. We'll see you at the historic Pabst Theater on September 30th.
Yay.
Welcome, everyone, to Myth Informed. Today, your hosts are Brian and Sean, and we are speaking with Tulsa-born author, speaker, entertainer, and all-around atheist spokesperson, Seth Andrews. Seth will be in attendance as a special guest at the Myth Information Conference in Milwaukee on September 30th, so about 1 month. Get your tickets now, and we're thrilled to be speaking with him today. You can find his written work within the pages of Deconverted and Sacred Cows, an awesome book. I picked that up at, I think, G2R last year. Seth is, of course, the host of the very popular podcast, The Thinking Atheist. Welcome, Seth Andrews.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
That's excellent. I really liked your podcast about the National Review article. And it's funny because I actually subscribed to the National Review. And when I read that, I'm like, oh boy, they're talking about me here. And it was definitely icky. And somebody who's writing that clearly doesn't understand kind of new atheism or the atheist movement at all. And you really did that well. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about what irked you so badly?
Well, yeah, and for those who are not familiar with the article, the National Review had published a piece recently called Whatever Happened to the New Atheists? And, of course, good luck defining new atheism. I mean, there are subjective definitions out there here and there. You know, there's, I think it was originally supposed to annotate atheists after like 2006 or 2004. Some people define it by persons. Obviously, the four horsemen are in the sort of the front of those definitions. You know, it's a movement. It's a different kind of atheism. And I'm just thinking to myself, what are you talking about? It's a nonsensical term. And so at the very beginning, by framing it, the National Review was saying, you know, that the left is casting off the new atheists because they are going after Islam instead of Christianity. And the left has become so hyper paranoid about appearing bigoted and racist, as if Islam was a race, that it's just kicked the four horsemen. Well, of course, Christopher Hitchens is long past, but the idea of the four horsemen out of liberalism altogether. They are now completely irrelevant. This is just another symptom of a dying patient. And, you know, the entire article was filled with straw men. It was just one misconception, one misstatement, one fabrication after another. And at the end of the article, I felt compelled to do a broadcast where we talked quite a bit about, you know, what the claims were. We talked about the four horsemen and these wild charges that, you know, Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins especially are these, you know, they're sexist white supremacist scumbags who represent the worst of humanity. I mean, they're not just flawed atheist activists whose work has impacted half a century, at least in Dawkins' case. No, they're the worst things in the universe. And it just, you know, it just went on and on and on. And as someone whose life has been positively impacted by the work of Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, you know, I had to stop and take issue. And of course, as you know, both of you know, and I'm sure your audience members know, we are living in full view of the death throes of nuance in at least American culture, if not global culture. So you're not really allowed out there to say that Richard Dawkins' work changed my life and has impacted millions all around the world. And, the God Delusion was a game changer in the conversations, and, other books, The Selfish Gene, The Blind Watchmaker, the speeches he's given all around the country and in fact all around the world, his activism, the fact that he's got people talking about atheism, none of that matters. No. If he makes a mistake, and we must then automatically assume that the mistake was made with the absolute worst of intentions, and he is also the worst thing in the universe. And it's maddening. And I found myself recently in a real point of frustration and exasperation because nobody's talking, everybody's shouting, everybody's sending, nobody's receiving, discussion, dialogue, they're just dead. And on top of all that, there seems to be a gleeful desire to set fire to good people, worthy conversations, important issues, just throw gasoline on every spark and just burn it down and then dance upon the ashes. Where does this come from? Why do people do it? I don't know, but I grieve. I just grieve every time I see it happen. And the internet is a playground for this type of thing. And it just hurts the heart to see it happen.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that, where people are going after and they're attacking a person's character. And the idea is that if you can cut them down character-wise, therefore their arguments must be bad, right? Come on. Even if a Nazi says the sky is blue, he's not wrong on that, right? But assaulting somebody's character is not an assault for their argument, and that's what we need to be doing, is talking about arguments rather than assaulting people's character. And obviously, if you're a Nazi, there is some serious character assaulting that maybe is worthy, but we're applying that to even people in the middle. It seems like everyone has to defend their character these days.
Well, and I think the antagonistic role that we're seeing play out is more prominent now because everyone has a platform. When you have a Twitter feed, that's a platform. When you have a podcast, that's a platform. When you're able to make videos on your own, that's a platform. I mean, this antagonistic style in humanity has always been there. But now I think because people have so much, more ability to get their hate phrases out there and really go after people with fame or, like a big audience and try and make a name out of themselves. And, this isn't new. This has kind of been around. If you look in the entertainment world, even like it's a bad analogy, but the old rap battles, remember you had the East Coast versus the West Coast because they're always going after whoever has the most prominent audience to make a name for themselves. And I personally think that's what we're seeing play out in social.
What do you think, Seth?
I will say that when it speaks to character, you can tell. I think someone's character is reflected in the language they use, the attitudes they have, the things that come out of their mouth are really in many ways reflections of what they're about. But I'm really exasperated by this tendency to always assume the worst. Matt Dillahunty calls it charitable listening. When we're listening to someone else, it's not that we're pushovers. It's not that we're monumentally naive. It's not that we're allowing ourselves to be steamrolled over or be conned. But charitable listening, not automatically assuming the worst of the worst. And so, Sam Harris had a recent podcast about identity and terror. And he was speaking that he believed that the Black Lives Matter movement was misguided. And, he used some very strong language. He just thought it was just the wrong idea, the wrong way. And, of course, everybody's saying, well, there's proof Sam Harris is a racist. Right. And I'm listening, and I was, as someone who believes in the merits of Black Lives Matter, as someone who supports it as an idea and as a cause in its best form, I totally disagree with Sam Harris on this specific issue. But this is a disagreement over tactics, not whether or not we should have equality among all the races and sexes. My first inclination, and of course, then they say, well, you're just an apologist. You're just deferring to your God, Sam Harris. I mean, it's impossible to talk to many of these people. Right. And I think, well, he's not saying that Black people are inferior. He's saying that he doesn't agree that Black Lives Matter is the right way to solve the race problem. It's a disagreement, a big one, over tactics. It's a discussion that must be had. Better ideas, I think, should be presented to Sam Harris, but it's unproductive and I think intellectually dishonest to immediately paint swastikas over
Yeah.
profile pictures of his face and say, aha,
Right.
Sam Harris, the racist. Plus, it plays right into the hands of people like C.J. Werleman, who had written in the New Atheist Threat and on his Twitter feed in many instances that Sam Harris has an audience comprised of racists. Well, Sam Harris has a monumentally large listening audience. And I think to myself, have you interviewed every person who's downloaded his podcast and has that subscribed? How can you qualify this broad overstatement? Hyperbole is just suffocating us to death out there. People are using it to try to buttress their position, but it's really self-defeating.
Yep. And to discredit all of the good that Sam Harris has done is ridiculous. Over a bad statement, Bill Maher goes through this, Joe Rogan, all the big names go through this. And, it's really this shortcut for the antagonist to latch onto something because they made a mistake. And because I think personally it takes work ethic to work hard, make connections, build a network, foster relationships. We've been working on this project for over 4 years, and it's hard. It's hard to meet people and to make those relationships and to make, to create allies. It's a lot easier to go after someone because of one mistake to try and make yourself bigger, seem bigger, and create your platform. I mean, unfortunately, that's kind of that's how I see it play out.
I suspect they call it arguing up. And you'll find this often in comment sections where, the minute you get the host or content producer, the speaker, the activist in question to acknowledge you've just elevated your own status. And now people are starting to choose sides, and this further elevates your sense of importance. I'm not saying this is always the case.
Right.
When people are throwing the gasoline on the spark, as I always like to say. But I do suspect that there is, on top of that as well, on top of what I think might be a quest for notoriety or relevance, I think is it's a desire to be the hero or the anti-hero. I'm not a joiner. I'm out here on the fringe. Therefore, I've got a better vantage. I've got more perspective. Good thing I'm here to help call out the ugliness that's happening. And I'm going to now spearhead the whatever it takes to call it out, to root it out, to shut it down, to put it under our boot. And I really honestly hear in their language a tremendous sense of self-importance.
Yep.
It's not that their voices don't matter, but, to stand out, they're to be in the cheap seats, far off the field of activism, and just throw trash at the people who are playing the game. Well, that's just a cheap shot, just a cheap shot.
I really agree. And I think some people that are doing this are probably coming from a dishonest place, but I suspect more actually feel like they're being moral. I feel like this is like a conflict of morals in some way. And I listen to a lot of Jonathan Haidt, who's a social scientist, and he says that morality binds and blinds, meaning it can kind of hold people together, but also blinds you to the other side. And we would talk to Christians all the time how many times have, Seth, you and I had to defend ourselves from, well, you couldn't possibly be moral without a God, right? Because they feel that, God, you just can't be a good person if you don't have that. And you can kind of blind yourself. And until you can engage with atheists and see that, now you can feel the other side. And you can kind of, maybe atheists can sometimes feel when you're engaging with a lot of Christians where they're coming from. Do you think that some of these things come from a super moral place, some of this divide that we're seeing?
Well, who was the ex-CIA operative? Operative may not be the right word, but she'd produced a video, I think last year or the year before, and she was drawing a circle around the, ISIS and the forces that were fighting ISIS, right? Mm-hmm. And she was talking about understanding that both sides think they're on the moral high ground. ISIS thinks what they're doing is right. Mm-hmm. ISIS thinks what they're doing is something that must be done, right? Mm-hmm. They believe they are ideologically pure. And this sort of puffed up morality that, self-generated, I think morality in some cases can be hugely dangerous when we lack the ability to listen and empathize and understand. And this doesn't mean agree, but to be able to absorb and get a three-dimensional look at what the opposing side is saying and doing and why. We operate then in our camp with a better understanding of our own position and the chance to improve it whenever possible. There's a great documentary it features former Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. It's called The Fog of War. He was Secretary of Defense during the Vietnam War. And he was interviewed long decades. I think he was like near 80 years old. It's just shortly before his death. And they were asking him pointed questions about Vietnam and our role in Vietnam and the failure of the Vietnam War, and 2 million Vietnamese, I think, dead, and 55,000 Americans dead, and nothing was accomplished. And he very rightly said, and very fairly said, that one of the lessons he learned was to empathize with the enemy. I'm paraphrasing, but he said, if we truly understood the Vietnamese and what was happening in Vietnam, we wouldn't have been there. Imagine all the lives that might have been saved if we had taken the time to understand Vietnam, its people, its culture, what they were thinking, why they were thinking it, what the results of those thoughts might be. And true understanding might have led us to better ideas and eliminated the waste of countless lives and billions of dollars. And I feel this is often the case. And again, there's already somebody hammering at a keyboard who's going, you want to give audience to the worst of the worst of the worst out there.
Mm-hmm.
You want to give them a platform. Well, there's a difference between listening and platforming.
Yep.
But I'm a free speech guy, and I agree with Christopher Hitchens. I don't want somebody else making the decision as to what I need or should hear or not hear. And I do want the opportunity to not agree, but to understand the positions being presented on the other side of the line.
Yeah, I think that, or maybe you feel this way, but I feel that there a purity is being created on both the right and the left. I mean, that you have to support Donald Trump, even though you've got to know what he's saying isn't true. I mean, he'll cite fake news. He'll retweet somebody that's making things up, and yet people are still supporting him. And over on the left, you exercise somebody out of, or excommunicate someone out of the community for a microaggression that they didn't want to commit, but that shows that they're really not supportive of minorities, and that less shades of gray and more binary. Do you feel that that's
there may be some of that? I see it too. I did a presentation a while back, a couple of years ago, called The Mother of Bad Ideas. And I think that people fall in love with an idea in many ways before they fall in love with the facts, the evidence, and or the reality of something. Yeah. They'll fall in love with a Trump as an idea. He's the outsider. He's successful. Every aspect of his life is a representation of opulence and success that could only come with genius,
Right.
And everybody around him is beautiful, and everybody around him is prosperous with yachts and this, and he's going to come from the outside in. He's not a politician. He's not beholden to anybody, blah, 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 blah. And they fall in love with this idea. And it's hard to break through that once they have really become infatuated with an idea like that. I use the example of Mother Teresa, who is, anyone who has done any research on her life, was really a troubled woman with some pretty horrible ideas. She was responsible for a tremendous amount of suffering. And if you go to someone who has fallen in love with the idea of Mother Teresa and you say, well, actually, she was responsible for a lot of suffering and had some horrible ideas, they just blink and shut down and say, no, it's Mother Teresa. I mean, of all people that you're not allowed to criticize, it's Mother Teresa. And I say, well, name 3 things about her that have nothing to do with her religion or her place of birth. And nobody has been able to tell me anything about it. They fell in love with the idea. And I think what happens on the other side of the camp is there are those who fall in love with the idea that they are sort of an anointed hero doing battle against evil, define evil however you want. They've fallen in love with the idea that everybody out there, who's a new atheist, quote unquote, new atheist, is part of an institutionalized racist cult. It's like C.J. Werleman would say. Yeah. They fall in love with these ideas, and it's hard to penetrate that once they've really become infatuated.
But so maybe what you can do when you're talking about empathizing, you can empathize with the idea. So if you were talking to a Trump voter, for example, and saying the idea of Trump as a fixer, the guy that's going to come and drain the swamp from the outside, that I get that idea, even though while disagreeing with the actual reality of it. You might be able to have enough common ground to start that conversation, but if you come in with, how could you? You have to be a racist. You have to be a bigot to support that man. You're probably not going to get anywhere and root that person farther in.
Yeah, and it's not fair. I know. I'm related to people who voted for Trump. I can think of one guy who he is one of the best people I know. He's just, I think, has a bad idea. He, in his own case, doesn't like Trump, but he was, because he's kind of a Fox News Christian, I think, despised Hillary even more. And so he chose what he thought was the lesser of two evils. Now, none of this makes him in any way. He's not a racist. He's not a white supremacist. He loves people. He's probably given more to time and money to charity than most anybody who would ever criticize him. He's one of those guys whose life is dedicated to helping others. He's taken people into his home who've been abandoned by their families. He's done tremendous work. And I think, he doesn't fit into the cookie cutter, man. You can't paint swastikas over everybody. You can't take the worst people at a pro-Trump rally who are throwing punches and paint everybody with that brush. First of all, it diminishes the actual instance where violence took place, which we need to talk about because you're killing it with hyperbole. And two, it's simply not fair to those who don't fit into that particular mold. There are huge shades in this spectrum of Trump support, and we have to figure out who they are and how that works.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And it seemed like we can do this a lot of times with Christians, that we could say, hey, we can sit down and actually talk. Why do you believe in God? We could approach that from a very sensible standpoint. And I almost feel like the atheist community is so good at talking to Christians and back and forth, and we had such good debates, that we should be able to take that sensibility and apply it to politics and some of the things that we're talking about. I think the social justice movement and those that are skeptical of social justice, that seems to be a big hot button, and that we can do this if we kind of apply those same principles. What do you think?
Well, I've been labeled an SJW off and on whenever I bring up whatever, social cause is important to me. And I don't require atheism to produce anything in anybody else. I'm not one of those people that's like, well, if you're an atheist, you must be a humanist. Mm-hmm. I'd sure like to see it translate into humanism. Dale McGowan has that great line that said, for him, atheism was the first step and humanism was the 1,000 steps that follow. That's how I feel, right? Okay. What good is my rejection of superstition if it doesn't inform my attitudes about the rest of the world and knowing that there's no life 2.0 and that Jesus isn't going to come down and sort of clean up the yard once we've trashed the planet, and that there is not necessarily a tomorrow kind of thing. It just makes today more critical, and I want to be a part of helping people. It speaks to so much, and we see so many of the arguments out there that are religiously motivated. Arguments against right to die or die with dignity, arguments for the death penalty, kind of an Old Testament mentality, arguments against gay rights and gay marriage, arguments against the rights of women to have control over their own bodies. These have religious roots. And so in my own life, I'd start to talk about social issues. And immediately I don't think it's a big group. I just think they're vocal and they know how to make a lot of noise, a lot of white noise. And they immediately just start throwing invective my direction. I'm like, wait, what are you talking about? Well, you're just an SJW, you're just a sellout. And then, before you know it, they've attached you to whatever other social justice warrior that they've decided they despise, usually somebody on the fringe of feminism or some other thing, some other movement who I may not even know about. I certainly don't know if I represent or they represent my opinions or positions. We don't really have any connection, but they have tried to link us. And, I was talking to somebody once who was called a social justice warrior. They didn't realize it was a problem. They're like, oh, hey, thanks. They thought it was a compliment. Why would I not want to be about trying to help people who are operating in an imbalanced playing field and to ease some suffering and hurting and to help make humanity better out there? I don't require it of somebody else. But why would that make so many good people such a target? Who are, the targeters, and why why are they so against our embracing of science, reason, the evidence,
Right.
our rejection of superstition? Why are they so against that translating into genuine help for other people? I want to, people ask me why I do the work I do. I'm like, well, if I had to bottle it up, it'd be I want to learn stuff and I want to help people. I mean, that's really what I want. I want to learn something new today, tomorrow, the next day. And however I can, I want to try to help people because people were there who helped me in my times of need. And so I don't know. I mean, there'll always be people who find it easier to curse the light, while they're sitting in the darkness. But I genuinely don't. I haven't been able to understand exactly why they're so opposed to the idea of people translating their rationalism into social issues.
Yeah. And I think it's even more maddening in the sense that these people don't bother to do their due diligence anymore. When we were at the Reason Rally and we live streamed it, we were called Crazy SJW and all this other stuff. We're holding a conference now. Now we're white nationalists and we're like completely on the other side. It's just bizarre to me. I mean, if you look at our history, if you look at, the fact that we brought Wu-Tang to the Reason Rally, or we've worked with atheists in Kenya, or we've brought Jewish comedians to Milwaukee, like how do you see that as white nationalism? And I think it gets even worse too when you look at the fact that a lot of people, we're bringing Sargon and Akkad to this conference, and we got nothing but shit for this online. But nobody bothered to look at the website and see that Thomas Smith is actually interviewing Sargon. So we just got all of this hate coming our way because they see one thing. They don't bother to do any, investigation into it. And if they would have just seen, hey, there's both sides are being represented here, maybe we don't get the vitriol. But I just think people are getting worse at that.
I don't know much about Sargon. I've seen his name out there quite a bit. Several people have said, you should talk to this guy. I know he's kind of a lightning rod. But, if he and Thomas Smith are on stage together, bringing opposing points of view in front of a live audience, I'd want to see that, right? I mean, what's going to be said? What are the positions being presented, the defenses and the rebuttals, and what type of hopefully good conversation, meaty conversation would take place? It's like, I'm sorry, the name escapes me, but the Muslim that Faisal Saeed al-Mutar is going to be talking with on stage.
Asra Nomani.
Thank you. I want to see that. I'm not pro-Islam,
right,
but I would love to be able to have that conversation happen in full view. I think Faisal's a sharp guy. I think, if anyone can speak to Islam and, its merits and or real problems, it could be that guy, a guy who originates from Iraq and has been talk about a guy who's been part of social causes, who's been doing humanitarian work and helping people escape the boot of radical Islam all around the world. This guy's for real. I'd love to see those two talk on stage. And I wonder, why wouldn't anybody else, right? It seems like a great opportunity.
Right. And I think to convince people, too, if we want to convince people, if you're preaching to the choir, you're not going to get any converts. The only way to convince people is to convince people that believe something other than you do. So in some ways, you do need an audience that's diverse, that doesn't necessarily agree, and reasonably balanced, so somebody doesn't feel like a tiny minority. I think 70-30 either way is a good enough mix. And maybe people change their minds or moderate their positions or understand the other side. Wow, you can find common ground. Oh, I didn't know you believed that.
Right.
And that's progress.
Well, there's also, I think, merit to, guys, I'm frustrated by, someone sees something in black and white on social media. Mm-hmm. You see a tweet, a text, a blog, right? And I know this person, or I know about this person. Do I contact them personally, privately, to try to get some clarity and to express my concern? Probably not. What I do is I go write a big ass blog or some kind of a video calling them out. And I'm not saying there isn't a time for public statements. There have been a couple of times in my activist quote unquote career where I've made public statements about a single person because I felt it had to be said. But there's such a lack of good faith, finding out what someone genuinely believes, taking it to them first. Everybody's so quick to square off and declare the other person Hitler. It makes me crazy. I in some ways have found myself checking out. and just trying to concentrate on the content at hand. I'm just going to produce the shows, do the interviews, put the videos out, tour, give the speeches, and just try to disconnect from some of the insanity out there. Because online, everybody's speaking in memes, and they didn't bother to source where the information came from on the meme. It's very, very frustrating.
Yeah, and I think that's a problem that we see in journalism. For really driven people, they want to be the first. They want to be the first to get the story. It doesn't matter. Sometimes in some cases fabricate things. So, and online, there's really this drive to be the first to cover something, the first to break. What's the next big thing that's going to break? I mean, even on YouTube, there's like this sense of pride to be first. There literally is you put first in the comments section, and like that's supposed to mean something.
Here's an example, just 30 seconds.
Sure.
Forgive me. Joel Osteen's taking all this heat down in Houston for not opening Lakewood Church, this huge 17,000 seat megachurch, right? And people are throwing all kinds of Joel Osteen memes out there. And I'm not saying that the memes themselves are all wrong. Some of them are spot on in their criticisms of this man. He's a mega pastor. He's worth $40 million. He lives in a $10 million mansion. He has this huge facility that could have been used for shelter. But Hemant Mehta posted an article, and it's been addressed in Snopes as well, that there is some evidence that during at least the initial moments of the Hurricane Harvey, that there were areas around the church that were actually flood zones, meaning that it would not have been an appropriate shelter. Now, I'm not giving Osteen a pass, because I think he totally dropped the ball. I think there are ways to use your massive resources to help the city, which is your host city,
right,
and help people beyond your congregation. But if you're somebody like me and I say, well, there is some complexity to the Joel Osteen story, and Lakewood may have been flooded. In fact, Snopes itself has to list conflicting stories, conflicting photographs. One shows that it was flooded. Another photograph says, no, it was not. We don't really know. To stop and speak about it with any real thoughtfulness or complexity, that's gone on the internet. All it is it's just Joel Osteen punchlines. And I'm like, well, if we're going to criticize the man, and we should criticize the man, okay? Let's criticize him for things that we have really good data for.
Right.
Like the prosperity gospel.
Even using his resources outside the church facility, getting ahead of it, being proactive, not living the best words of Jesus in his own life, as he's essentially making tens of millions of dollars while so many people out there are suffering, and he's doing nothing about it. He's just giving people happy, clappy memes about positive thoughts, and it's just total crap. The idea that I think he told yesterday, he told the morning show on Today that the reason he didn't open up the church was because the city had not yet asked him to. Meanwhile, there were apparently mosques all around Houston who had already opened their doors.
Oh boy.
I mean, that's a legitimate complaint, right?
Yeah.
But no one had bothered to check the logistics to find out, is it genuinely a flood zone? Were they really flooded out? Was access blocked? These are important specifics, because if we use hyperbole, if we don't check our facts, and we're so busy falling in love with the idea that Joel Osteen is a crook and an asshole and all these things, we defeat our own credibility. Let's take a few extra minutes and let's go do some fact checking and evidence gathering, and then we'll have some buttressing information to base our position on, and we walk into the room with a lot more credibility.
Yeah, I agree. And I often online, it's a war zone out there. I mean, you can get tagged with SJW or some horrible version of which, or white nationalist or whatever, that it's just toxic. But it seems like when you gather, when you're speaking face to face and you're getting everybody together, it's a lot better. You're looking into somebody's eyes. There's so much more, I guess, niceness, just humanity perhaps going on. And that's another reason why we wanted to do like the Mythcon as a conference, not an online conference, because we want people to see, wow, okay, you believe this. Wow, I really completely had a mischaracterization of people that thought like you, and so on and so forth. We can make that side and realize that there's probably truths to both sides.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying we ought to meet in the middle and divide.
Yeah.
But let's say, just for example, the left is 80% right and the right is 20% right. Well, why should we just reject the 20% ideas over on the right Why should we give them up and say, well, because we're right? Well, let's mix and match and take the best of both, because you know that there's good ideas.
Yeah,
on everyone has got some good ideas.
Right, but I mean, to Seth's earlier point, I mean, atheists are human too, and emotion is such a strong, it takes such a strong hold over people. And, you know, if we're putting people on stage that they don't agree with, they're going to do whatever they can to make, you know, and they did. They tried to deplatform us. They've threatened our attendees, which, you know, if people are listening to this that are showing up, there's no worries. You know, we have this under control. But, you know, they threaten protesters, which it's highly, highly unlikely. And it's sad. Instead of just letting people have a stage that, you know, you don't necessarily agree with their opinions, and letting them dig themselves a hole if you think their arguments are so bad. I mean, it's a really, really sad. Atheists protesting atheists. It's really sad.
Well, I think 2 points come to mind. One is that I have really learned over the last 7-8 years, atheists are not necessarily rationalists.
Yes.
Atheists are not necessarily good people. You know, there's a meme out there that has atheist as an anagram or something. It's like I don't even know what it is. Every letter of the word atheist says something. You know what? Let me pull it up real quick. Atheist.
Sure.
I used it as an example. I'll have to look at. You know what? Forgive me, guys. I don't have it in front of me. But essentially, it's a something free thinker. And I'm like, well, you may be an atheist for all the wrong reasons. You may be an atheist because the aliens told you.
Yeah,
there is no God. You may be an atheist because you simply haven't taken the time to think about it. And, you know, you may be an atheist and just be a horrible person. You may have really bad attitudes and ideas toward other people. Atheism is not a guarantee that you are a worthy human being. There's so much more to the equation. I've definitely learned that. And back to your point about people changing how they approach each other when they are face to face. A very quick personal story. This was back when I first started the Thinking Atheists radio show. There was a guy who called the show, and he was talking about how he would show up at churches after Sunday service, and he would hold up these signs of Jesus having gay sex with another Jesus, just to antagonize the churchgoers who were walking out of the church steps with their young children. He felt this was an appropriate way to ridicule Jesus and would actually be a constructive part of the fight against superstition. And of course, I'm like, what are you doing, man? You know, you're accosting these people when they walk out of the church doors. It's not helping us at all. And we had a big sort of blow up over it. And he just went off on social media. He called me every name in the book. And I think he had a podcast of his own. And he took my logo and he did a bunch of stuff to it. And, I don't know what he drew on it. And I mean, they just destroyed me. Right. And I think it was a year later, I was at a convention and he was in attendance. And I walked into the elevator and I looked and I knew the guy's face and there he was. Mm-hmm. We were both of these people who had been on the opposite sides of this sort of thing. And he had been just roasting me online. I'm sure he'd hated my guts. And we both just stood there looking at each other in the elevator as we're going from floor to floor, not knowing what's going to happen next, who's going to say what. And he looked at me and he kind of smiled. And he said, "You're not going to punch me, are you?" And then we both just busted out laughing. And I'm like, of course I'm not going to punch you, man. And we started to talk over lunch and we became friends. And all of that water was totally under the bridge. All that bad blood was totally put away. Mm-hmm. Us spending a few minutes in close proximity, having a conversation like real people with compassion and good intention, it changed everything. Mm-hmm. And I'm always reminded about that, whenever possible. That's why I feel it's so important for us to try to address each other, as people and not as just 140 characters in a Twitter feed. It's just so much more productive.
Right. And the social media harassment is powerful. I mean, when we were going through the 5 days of just onslaughts of being called white nationalists and having our venue contacted and all these threats coming at us, I mean, it takes a toll on you. And we're like, 30, 40 years old. We're grown-up people. I can just imagine like an influential like teenager
Ouch.
or someone that really has low self-esteem going through that. I mean, it's very, very powerful, and it's sad. And I hope people start understanding what they're actually doing with that. I agree that these conversations, we have our frickin' phone number on our website. If they wanted to call our Google line, they could have.
Mm-hmm.
If they really wanted to, share their concerns with what's happening, call us.
Right.
Because that's a completely, that's a human thing.
And we will admit that there were those that did have express objections politely in emails, and we responded to all of them.
Every single email.
I absolutely felt like it was important to do that, to actually, if you're going to engage us politely, absolutely, here is our reasoning.
Yeah.
And many times I've gotten somebody, oh, that's what you're trying to do.
Exactly.
Oh, that sounds kind of interesting.
Right.
When it started off, how dare you?
Right.
Or, or something slightly, at least there was, they didn't say I was a white nationalist, but how dare you is something I can go actually talk to, but you're a Nazi, you're a racist, you're not going to engage.
Yeah, and Seth, you've been a thought leader in atheism for a while, and I wanted to pick your brain on this. And obviously your show is wildly popular. I've been listening for years. We had you on years ago. I mean, it's just you were like. We were so excited to have you. Like it was truly an honor for us. And after getting to know you and just seeing how cool of a guy you are, it's just crazy because you typically you tend to think people have egos that have notoriety, and you definitely do not. So we really appreciate having you on the show and coming to the conference. But over these last 8 years, are you starting to see, are atheists bored? Are they, is there just like, are they running out of, cause like, the God debate thing, for the most part in the West, in Kenya, it's still a huge issue. And in the Middle East, obviously is still, a huge issue. There's areas it's still a huge issue, but in the West, I'm talking about the atheists in the West. Are they bored? Are they like, why are we seeing all of this backlash in the community? Why are we seeing, people saying that attendance is down and they're going after Reason Rally because, that supposedly was down and all this? Why all the negativity?
Wow, how do I unpack that one? That's like War and Peace of an answer here. I'll try to encapsulate it as best I can. If I'm yammering on, just interrupt me. This is what happens when you have another podcaster on the radio. He just doesn't stop to draw breath.
We love it. It makes our job easier.
There is an element of been there, done that. I've noticed it in the tour. I speak probably in 35 venues a year, but most of those are not major conventions. Most of those, I call them tour stops. I team up with a local free thought group, and they bring me in, and we'll maybe chain a few cities together. And so I just come in, and I'll bring a presentation, kind of a high impact, fun presentation. We'll do that for 45 minutes, and then we'll hang out for an hour and take pictures and talk and maybe have a meal and just chill. And it's just a kind of a night out. And I've had wild success with those. They're focused. They don't take up the whole weekend. They don't cost $400 or what some of these major conventions cost. I mean, they just come out, everybody. We're going to do this and have a few hours of fun together. I have noticed that the model for the major conventions, the ones where you're asking people to, bring your kids and buy 4 nights of hotel rooms, plus the cost of the ticket, plus meals, plus this. I mean, before you know it, it's like you paid for a family vacation. Yeah. And I think people are doing that less and less. You're seeing conferences that had upwards of 1,000 who are now getting a few hundred. I think there's some fatigue involved. And I think the conference model needs to change a little bit. I'd like to see it leaner and more focused. Instead of deciding more is more. I don't need Thursday through Monday, okay? Sometimes a 1 day, maybe a 2 day event is all you need. Try to lessen the burden for people. I think there's also only so many ways you can say there is no evidence for any God anywhere. And I struggle with this on my own show. And people will be like, well, how come you do the off-topic shows? Like I do one called My Date with Google, where we just do random knowledge, just stuff we didn't know. Why, what's Masago when they put it on your sushi? What is that? And, what's Spam made out of? And, just dumb stuff. Is premium gasoline really better for my car than regular unleaded? I don't know. Let's go find out. We'll do a whole show on questions like these. Half the reasons because I need a break, and the other half's because I think the audience needs a break.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They want to talk about life stuff. And I myself think there is a level of fatigue with those people who are they're just going after, you can only go after the 66 books of the Bible so many ways and so many varieties, so many verses. There's a finite number of arguments. This religion has produced nothing new in thousands of years. The apologists aren't producing anything new. And so, it's a challenge, I think, for us to keep it interesting for the viewers and the listeners. On many levels, I think we're going to have to grow past what we don't believe and really do. And again, we're getting into social issues, but again, be more about what we do believe and what we are about, and just talk about life stuff. In radio and FM radio, when I was a broadcaster, we called it a relate. It's when you're speaking about something and somebody who is on the other end of the radio is nodding their head going, oh, yeah. It could be something stupid. Now, I remember the time I'd locked myself out of my car and I was late for an appointment. And so you're telling the story, and there's hundreds of people in the audience who are like, oh, God, I've done that. That sucks.
Right.
My boss just chewed my ass today over something stupid. I didn't feel like I deserved it, blah, blah, blah. And some people are going, oh, God, I've had that happen. When people can relate to the things you're talking about, they lean forward into the discussions. They begin to take them more personally, and it becomes a journey that you take together. We as a movement need to be telling more stories, broader stories, and I think we need to become better storytellers. We're going to have to make that evolution if we're going to remain relevant, I think, as a movement.
No, I totally agree. And I think another thing that's missing outside of, the divide in atheism, I think we're bad at making allies. What we're doing with our show lately is we're partnering with a lot of comedians, actors, directors, producers, people that, have their mainstream audiences that we're trying to tap into, because I think there's a lot of atheists out there that just aren't into this. But if we can somehow offer it up in a way with someone that's funny or someone that they love or whatever, I think we can really make, we can get more people interested in it. Now, I know there are some, I would love to see the ratio and the percentages here of those that, were in religion and are leaving religion. And, because when they find this, like we're like, oh, this is great, but how long does that last? So I think,
I think there's also a group of people that they see any gathering or organization as a religious thing. I think that's, I was already part of one herd. I'm not going to sell out and lose my individuality to go and join this other herd over here. And what they've just done, they may not realize it. They just surrendered to the church, something that human beings do naturally. Right, coming together to pursue common goals and celebrate common interest and to learn things, challenge each other, develop relationships. This is not a religious thing. Right. This is something that happened long before the church was ever established. It's just the church does it well, and the church is selling the narrative that it owns it, but it does not. And we need to stop apologizing for gathering together.
I agree. And if you look at the more popular podcasts or media outlets, you see Joe Rogan comes to mind, people like this that, they touch on some of these topics too. I think it's really up to us to ally with them. But there are other things happening. I think we're missing the boat on some of this, the Scientology thing. And again, Seth, thank you for having Ron on the show, Ron Miscavige, because I really think, that is an area where atheists could help. Because I do some of the live tweeting for Ron's account when Leah's show is on, and we get a lot. It's a ton of religious people coming in saying, Jesus be with you. Thank you for leaving this cult and speaking out. And, Jesus loves you and all this. I really think the ex-Scientology, I thought that's what atheism was helping people that have left a cult or something that controlled their lives like that. And to support them. And I really haven't seen it. I've reached out to major conferences about having these ex-Scientologists at their conferences, and they're just not interested, So that's one area that I haven't seen a lot of focus. I'm starting to see a little bit changing now with the popularity of Leah's show. But for the most part, the Scientology thing we haven't touched. We mentioned atheists in Kenya. We tried bringing that to the platform. They, the country told them they couldn't be essentially a legit organization. The country said, because you're atheists, you cannot be a legit organization. That is another thing that the Western atheists could support. We've supported them by, throwing money at them for events and things like that. And There really are things out there, and I think that we just kind of missed the boat on some of it because we're so focused on fighting one another and trying to one up one another. And I hope to see that change.
I'd like to think that most of the people who are not sort of these brand name antagonists, the people who are watching and listening, they're just as weary of the fighting as we are. I'd like to think that many people, I'd like to think the majority of people are reasonable people who genuinely want good things, and they see in 3 dimensions, and they don't start by declaring everybody in opposition to be an enemy. And they're interested in understanding, and they'd rather build a bridge than barbecue one. I'd like to think there are a lot of people. I think many of those people have simply checked out because they see so much toxicity that they don't want to be anywhere near. It's like radioactive, right? I don't want to get contaminated. And I would like to encourage those people, if you feel that sense of exasperation, you're not alone. Many of the people who are on the front lines of this movement are struggling to try to figure out what to do. In my own camp, I've made a commitment to keep my eyes on the big picture, to keep my eyes on the prize. I'm also not going to give the antagonists, who I think they're like the Joker in Dark Knight. They just want to watch the world burn.
Exactly.
I'm not going to allow those people to control my ideas, my convictions, my schedule. I won't allow them that power. If someone wants to come to me reasonably and make an argument that, hey, this may be problematic and let's examine it, and we speak like real people in a good faith discussion, I'm all about that. But if you lead with threats and baiting and the worst of invective and insults, if you are an agent of chaos in that way, I can just scratch you off my list. You now are completely irrelevant in terms of whether or not you will affect my decision, because you have removed yourself from the credibility thing. And I find it tragic, but it's a commitment I've made in my own life. If I consider the source and you're acting in bad faith, you are gleefully trying to inflame and hurt and destroy and tear down and rip apart a movement I love. Even if you claim that you are doing so for the best of reasons, we can see right through that. And we can see that you are much too happy about the pain that you are causing other people, and we must scratch you off our list and move on.
Yeah, and you can be unique without having to be the antagonist. You can, create allies at the same time coming up with something different. I mean, that's...
And if you have something to say and you're good at saying it, you don't have to argue up or write the coattails of somebody else into the spotlight. You can actually create or cultivate a spotlight of your own,
Correct.
Get your own.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right. And when you're talking, right, when I guess some people call them trolls, coming in, if somebody's going to approach you like that, very rudely and not honestly, you can cut them out of the discussion. And that, so what we're really hoping for Mythcon is, if you want to have a reasoned debate, then we want you. But if you want to cause harm on either side and you're there to shit post or shit talk, no, stay home, right?
You're not welcome, right?
No.
The party's not designed for you if you're showing up with bad intentions.
And the PAPS is really good at taking care of those individuals. So
I hear a lot of stuff about Sargon. I don't know Sargon. The truth is, I'd love to. I hope he's at my dinner table. Who is this guy? I want to know more about him. And if we fall on opposite sides of key issues, if we're very, very different people, even if we rub each other the wrong way, I'll still want to have dinner and find out and get under the guy's skin. And I hope he would feel the same. I really want to try to cultivate a world where we can all be in the same room together and it's okay.
Absolutely.
And then, and two of the other guests we didn't mention are Armored Skeptic and Shoe on Head, who are also very popular YouTubers. We did get some shade for inviting them too, although to me, very reasonable people. They absolutely want to have a discussion. They've reached out. That's the reason we're giving them a platform. Funnily enough, they're actually not going to be discussing social justice issues, even though they are social justice critics. They're going to be talking about social media and how
Oh,
it's
I'm sure
changed
it'll come up.
yeah, but it'll
I'm
be
sure if they do it that much, it's going to organically come up in conversation.
Yeah,
Or it'll be
will.
part of a Q&A. Somebody's going to bring it
sure.
up. I'm sure.
But
So.
again, we'll be able to engage in the right way. And
Yeah.
one of the other things too, as much shade as we've been getting on this, and being called a Nazi, a white nationalist, all these things, rape apologist, yes.
Stereo.
I try to, rather than sometimes the religious would always say, everything happens for a reason. And I definitely don't believe that at all. But I do believe we can take one tiny silver lining out of a really shitty situation. And in a way, what my silver lining was going to be is, maybe I feel like how an average, pious Muslim that's not a terrorist in America feels coming out of the mosque in the hijab, getting looks, reading Jihad Watch or something and saying, wow, everyone's saying my mosque and all the mosques need to be surveilled.
Yeah.
And now everyone's saying, oh, all white people are white supremacists. White people have to root out the white supremacists in their midst. And I'm thinking, I don't hang out with them. And many Muslims don't. I can empathize with how they must feel. And I would encourage those on the right that do talk about Islam like that to think about that in reverse. And it's so important that we moderate and think, and we're going to do it honestly and carefully. Because it's okay to critique Islam. Just don't be an anti-Muslim bigot. And if you're on the left, it's not all white people. Do not say to white people, you've got to fix
It's like
this.
all cops are terrorists. I had Dan Errol had said that he believed all police officers were terrorists in our conversation. And I remember thinking all nearly 1 million law enforcement officers, this is the type of hyperbole that I'm speaking of. And ironically, Dan's been one of the biggest critics of this, and he's been causing some real noise out there. I had Dan on my show. We talked for 35 minutes, cordially, casually, firmly, in strong disagreement, like adults. We weren't throwing the furniture at each other. We just exchanged ideas. We were very honest with each other about it. At the end of the day, we stood extremely far apart on the issues, but we had a dialogue. We had a discussion, and his position and my position both got to see the light of day. It can be done. It doesn't mean I agree with Dan in any way.
Right.
But if he's talking about deplatforming because someone is an extreme person, he himself has some very extreme views, and he was allowed on my show for almost 40 minutes to say whatever he wanted to say.
Right.
Exactly.
It just seems like a double standard.
You're offering a bigger platform than we are.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's what they keep saying. Sargon platform, Sargon. He has over 700,000 subscribers on YouTube. We have the Paps. You know what I mean? Like, this is not and the Paps is awesome. Don't get me wrong, but it doesn't fit 700,000 people. So, it's just bizarre. And Dan Errol, I mean, he's one. I guess he's kind of the representative of that type of thing. You got to be careful what you're advocating for, because if you're advocating to punch Nazis, and if someone comes and knocks you out one day, this is going to be the guy that's suing or pressing charges. I mean, honestly, come on. Like,
somebody declares he hates God and he's promoting hate speech. They decide that he's a violent person verbally, and they punch him and justify it.
Exactly.
Where does it end? Where does it end?
It's scary.
Right. I mean, we might as well just go back to mob justice rather than the court system. It seems silly.
Yeah. Well, Seth, thank you again so much for being on the show. It's truly an honor, and we're finally going to get you to Milwaukee. You're just going to be. I think you're bringing some recording equipment and going to.
Yeah, I mean, for those are expecting, I'm not actually on stage. I'm kind of there for the film premiere on Friday night, and then I'm going to hang around for the conference on Saturday. I'm interested to see how it all plays out, and it's my hope everybody there they'll have a good time. They'll hear a lot of different positions respectfully presented. It'll be a time where we have a lot of fun and make connections and friends, and at the end of the day, leave better people. It's my hope that that's what the day and the weekend represents, and I appreciate being invited.
Well, it's kind of a sign of the times too. The irony with all of this is we're doing a debate on Islam. We're calling Jesus a myth in a movie. We have an ex-Scientologist, the father of David Miscavige, there speaking, and somehow a YouTube entertainer still on the show.
I wouldn't have called that. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to shake hands with Ron Miscavige, a guy in his 80s who escaped the cult, and his own son sort of runs the show. I mean, it's talk about it. I told him on the radio, man, your story is a movie. It'll be a tremendous honor to be able to shake his hand in person there that weekend. And so
he's got a strong grip too.
I'll definitely gonna be taking a selfie, sticking it on social media.
Yeah, he's got a strong grip. He works out every day. The guy's
and we'll be ending the show with a quick plug for the movie, because we'll be ending the Mythcon with a movie, which I think everybody's going to get behind. It's Batman and Jesus. It's a documentary and comedy starring a whole host of people that you'll know in the atheist arena: Aaron Ra, Richard Carrier, David Fitzgerald, Faisal Matar, among others. I know I'm forgetting
Allie Jackson. Yeah.
Allie Jackson. And it's going to pick how the lore of Batman has changed and juxtapose that against to the lore of Jesus, how it's changed over time. It's going to be really cool. It's going to premiere, and I think everyone's going to really like that.
Yeah.
Looking forward to seeing it. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you, Seth.
Thanks, Seth.
Thank you for listening to Myth Informed. Myth Informed is brought to you by Mythicist Milwaukee. Producer Sean Frasick, associate producers Fritz Blondone and Kristen Whitaker Hood, engineer Josh Benishek, technical consultant Jason Lawson, and hosts Brian, Dimitri, Jacob, and Joseph. Every week we produce a new podcast that sheds light on religion, secularism, and mythology. If you enjoy this show, please support us on Patreon at patreon.com/mythicist. Mythicist Milwaukee also brings major secular conferences and debates to the Milwaukee area, along with community events, both local and online. To support us in bringing future events, become a member at mythicistmilwaukee.com to receive member-only benefits. You can also visit mythicistmilwaukee.com and hit the donate button located at the bottom of each page to place a financial donation amount of your choice. And now, the closing theme, written and performed by Shelley Siegel.
Athena's wisdom and beauty, and Hades underneath. Isis of fertility, and ether of the Greeks. They all lie at rest, and who will be the next to die? You know they are all myths, and who will be the next to die? There was a time when everyone believed. Helios in the sun, Poseidon in the sea. Athena's wisdom and beauty, and Hades underneath. Isis of fertility, and ether of the Greeks. They all lie at rest, and who will be the next to die? You know they are all myths, and who will be the next